accuracy, but designed for convenience. And here is a classic example. This is the Peters map, which you may or may not have heard of, which sort of tried to represent the world in a more accurate way, or a way that is different from the way we used to see it. And you may see some of the differences on this map that might surprise you. But they also give you the opportunity to play with representation. Here's a nice example. This is a map that represents countries as their gross domestic product. So suddenly, it's a familiar image, but our perception of it is very different in the way it's representing the information. And again, something like this, sort of combining visualization ideas into taking something familiar, a map of US states, and putting different ways of representing other information into it. Whether you like these sorts of things or not, but they're interesting ways of sort of representing ideas in a method that people can understand easier sometimes. And of course, there's a classic example of the underground or subway maps that are completely and utterly designed to represent convenience and not accuracy. They do not represent the real world at all. They are created to make understanding something important, how to get from A to B. That is their actual point. So I'm going to use repeatedly throughout this presentation Docker as an example. You don't have to know what Docker is, you don't have to care what Docker is. It's purely I just like to have a practical, reasonably sized, reasonably complex project to sort of refer backwards and forwards to. So I went to the Docker website to try and look at their images and see what images they use to represent themselves. And this is the plain one. Now, I don't know about you, this doesn't really tell me very much. It's a cute image, but as far as I can tell, it's a shipping company staffed by animals. That's what I think Docker is. It's a nice image, yes, but it doesn't really tell me very much. So I had a look around trying to find some other images. I don't really want to criticize or anything like that, but I just want to sort of say, so again, this image is semi-helpful. It's telling me something. There's a lot of terminology here that I'd have to understand what it is. There's a lot of text as well. There's also a lot of, Docker especially uses a lot of familiar English words, and it's very tempting just to use those, even though they don't really mean anything in relation to the actual product. Then there's images like this, which again are describing a very particular perspective of Docker, but aren't really telling me what it is. And then there's a very simple image like this that is simple, but still doesn't really tell me anything. So it can be quite hard to actually get an image right. It's not an easy task. And of course, whenever you introduce images to someone, usually the first statement can be something like this: I can't draw. I would actually say, it doesn't matter. And you actually probably can. It's actually not that hard to draw, really, to get started. And I think this is the crucial matter. Something that's come up a few times in this conference is write first, edit later. And I'll say the same thing with images. Just draw it, and then refine it later, or if you like, find someone who you consider can draw to improve it. But we are the people who are good at explaining ideas. Find a way to explain the idea, and then get someone who can draw better than you to refine it later. And there's some really nice examples of very simple images that work very well. So this is an example of sketch notes from, I'm probably going to get the name very wrong, Tomomi Amura. This is kind of called sketch notes. It's often done sort of an agile principle of sketching when someone's talking. There might be some people in the audience doing it right now. And this is, it's simple. It's explaining a complicated topic with some nice images. I don't know how effective it is at explaining it, but everyone can relate to it. And the illustrations are nice, but they're not complicated. Pretty much anybody could draw this kind of quality of image if they wanted to. And here's another really nice example. This is from a woman called Felienne, which I also probably mispronounced because she's Belgian. And most of her drawings are in her presentations. It's hard to find her pictures isolated, and so you lose a bit of context not hearing her presentation. But she does these very effective and simple drawings, and also the crucial thing is people remember her talk, so remember what she was talking about, which is kind of half the point. And then, of course, there's the classic example of XKCD. The artist of XKCD is very good at occasionally explaining quite complicated things with images. And there's a lot of text here. It's very text heavy, but focusing on the images are simple, and with very, very simple images, he puts a lot of character in them. That's actually kind of the most important thing, the character and putting a bit of personality. You can put personality into images. So I was thinking about this, and I'm going to give a lot of caveats here. Because I was thinking long and hard about how I could represent Docker as a simple image. And I did this at 7:30 this morning in about 2 minutes, because I had actually been thinking about it for a very long time, and I had a somewhat drunken conversation with Paul and Sven last night about how we would represent Docker as an image, and the conversation went on way longer than it took me to draw this, but I'm not saying it's perfect, I'm not saying it's great, I'm not saying it's good, but it was my attempt, which was developer is happy because they can create applications easily. The applications are separate from each other, they can be connected with each other if they want. If an application is destroyed, they can create it again just as easily. I'm not saying this is the solution to individually exposed Docker, but I'm just saying it took me very quickly just to give it a go and see what happens, and then refine it from there. So, in summary, images embrace the medium, enhance the text. Images can be interactive, and we're sort of moving on to that later in the presentation. You don't have to be able to draw. You can start the drawing and then get someone else to finish it. But I guess the negative of images is they are hard to translate and hard to maintain in the long run. This is the negative of images.
There has been some evidence to show that younger and older learners, and I mean this in terms of experience, not just age, have different preferences for the way they like to learn. So video versus reading. And opinion is still divided about the value of reading versus video with regards to learning. But we can't avoid the fact that video is increasingly popular and big business. Video gives you the opportunity to present a cohesive package of style and voicing, and also present personality in the way you present, and more subtle ways of communication through the way you talk or through your body language and hand gestures. So I can tell you if I find something serious or serious. But of course you have to worry about things like microphone placement, setting up video cameras, the artifacts that come from a room. This room has a very high ceiling and creates lots of echo. So they're harder to edit, require a whole bunch of new skills, and are harder to maintain. But I would recommend at least trying introductory videos for your project to see how popular and effective they are. So let's take a quick look at a Docker example. To get started with Docker for Mac, firstly make sure you download the Community Edition. Unless you're an enterprise user, visit the correct webpage, click the download button and wait for the file to download. When it has, find the correct disk image in the Finder and mount.
I won't bore you with the Docker example actually. Maybe that was a bit unnecessary, but you started to see the point that you could show people exactly what to do. Hopefully as representative as possible in how they would then use a tool. Especially, Docker traditionally was a command line tool, but now it has elements of GUIs and applications and things like that, so you can show things like that. The advantage of video is you get to present all this in one place. You get to have the explanation, you get to have the demonstration, and you can also mix media. I didn't really mix much media here, but one of the lightning talks yesterday showed a demonstration of video with animations and graphics and all sorts of things like that. So mixing a lot of the other elements we're covering in this presentation all together. Now, of course, the negatives of video, they're very time consuming. I actually am working on a video course that is a total of about 3 hours, and I would probably say it's going to take me about the best part of part-time 10 months to make 3 hours of video, which is very time consuming and not very efficient, but yes, anyway, that gets into the debate of how effective video is, and it's also hard to maintain, of course. Editing video is far harder than editing text. One of the other criticisms of video is actually that you lose text. You lose text for people who want to be able to read the text. You lose search and SEO and things like that. And there are some examples of JW Player where you can actually have text alternatives of a video and scroll back and forth between them, which is quite cool. Anyone, if you'd heard the audio of this, you would have noticed the text isn't 100% accurate, but it's accurate enough, I guess, and then you can edit it. This is a really cool idea. It has some issues. I guess the positives are it caters to everybody. You kind of have the best of both worlds. or maybe the worst of both worlds, depending on your opinion. It's also good for search and SEO. And then there's a couple of examples there of lynda.com uses this a lot. And then JWPay and VideoPath are kind of two players that do this. They're all proprietary and there's no real standard here. So it's kind of early days, but interesting nonetheless, and maybe there will be some sort of open standard in the near future. If video is too much, then there's always animated GIFs, which are very easy to make, and are very easy to share, and are very small, and a very kind of convenient universal format. So if you want to try video, but don't want to get into the whole kind of complex process, try animated GIFs. One of the negatives actually of animated GIFs, they're surprisingly easy to record, but surprisingly hard to edit, which is annoying. Photoshop kind of does it, and even then it's unwieldy. There might be other options, but that's one of the downsides. So give them a go to begin with, and in theory they could be automated if you do that sort of thing, but there's opinions on whether that's useful or not, and how plausible that is. But try animated GIFs first before maybe getting to proper video. Oops. Okay, playgrounds. I kind of use the word playground to mean a whole bunch of things, which I'll come to, because I don't know really the right word. What I basically mean is the ability to let a developer, I mean I mostly work on developer tools, so this is sort of definitely aimed at the developer market, the ability to actually experiment with your product there and then in the documentation. If you already have an API, then life is kind of easier because a lot of API specs come with tooling that does this sort of thing automatically. So here's an example of Swagger. To be honest with you, the Swagger of the Docker API is not a very good Swagger file, but you get the point of the ability to try around, play around with parameters, see what the results look like. That's basically it. Let's say if you're using one of these formats, you kind of get it for free, and it's quite an easy way to start with that kind of field. And most of the other API specs have similar things. If you will have more than an API, or you want to try more, then we have tools like JSFiddle, CodePen, JSBin, Replit, where you can have this kind of two-pane code on one side, output on the other. And it gets a little bit out the realm of documentation, but a lot of them allow you to embed them. So you can embed them in the main documentation and give people the chance to experiment there and then with something you've just told them. I'm going to come back to CLI tools in a minute, because I kind of include them together, because you're basically having function and explanation together. But then there's this whole new breed of all these very early days, but tools like Katacoda and Scrimba. And this is Scrimba, so is that playing? This actually is a bit like JSFiddle in that you have it's mainly web languages on the one side, the output on the other side, but also really interestingly, it actually lets you record your audio and video as well. So you get a direct mix of explanation and the code demonstration. You can edit them, they're easy to share, and this is actually an open source project. It's very, very new, but quite cool. It doesn't offer much in terms of documentation, but you can add comments, and the comments can be clickable, so you can at least give people jumping off points to other places. And because it's new and open source, they're very much open to suggestions, actually. So feel free to offer suggestions on how that could be improved. And then on the CLI tool, I include CLI tools because often for developers, we want to actually go to where they are. So they like to experiment with code, and they like to use a CLI. So why not turn CLI tools into kind of an onboarding process? And this is an example from Contentful. I've sped it up quite a bit, so it might look a little bit confusing. But basically, it takes you through the whole process of getting started. It takes you to a web page to get your authentication codes. It downloads everything you need locally. It starts up the web page for the demo application, and even the web page is documentation. So you kind of have a tool that gives you code to look at, an example to play with, and tells you every step of the way what's going on and where you can find more information. So it's actually a really, really nice way of explaining something, right where a developer likes to kind of be. And there's other companies that have been doing this. So sort of summarizing this area, I personally feel these are possibly the best way to demonstrate, especially developer tools. And developers do like them. But they're not always relevant. They're not going to be relevant to every documentation person in this room. You have to deal with issues of things like security. because if you give people access indirectly to certain systems, there's a potential to cause harm. And you will probably need some kind of development to create these in the first place. There's some of the negatives, but in the long run, they can be quite effective. Okay, now I'm going to move into augmented reality and virtual reality. These are definitely much more applicable in hardware. So here's some examples, and last year we did actually have someone from Google Data Centers talking about their documentation. So there's a lot of people who do document physical things, and these make a lot of sense in that space. So you can actually very clearly, easily see exactly where something is in reality, in augmented reality, and they're very good for teamwork, as you can see. And these are very popular in certain industries. And I think quite effective. They've been quite effective and quite popular. Here's some of the tooling that gets to, this doesn't look like documentation tooling for sure, but they have a lot of interesting potential use cases. And I started thinking, okay, great, in hardware, it's somewhat obvious how they could be useful. How could this look in software? And I mean, I'm probably picking examples for the sheer hell of picking an example, because I don't know if this is a particularly realistic kind of example, but just to prompt some thought. And this is a very, very basic kind of thing. But I'm thinking, again, in the near future, I think there's going to be a lot of people with newer versions of goggles, glasses, and other sorts of assistants that are always kind of there. So maybe we could interact with those in some way to enhance what people are doing. So if, for example, you're using a software product or reading its old traditional documentation, and this device is usually hooked into your computer and knows what you're running, what you have installed and things like that, we can have the advantage of, and I think this is the key kind of take home from this whole area, the actual context of what the user has available. So the little AR goggle pops up saying, it looks like you're using Windows. If you don't have Docker installed, I recommend you start here. And I've screenshotted their current documentation, but of course in the ideal world it would just take them straight to that section and show them exactly what they need, because we know what they have, so we don't have to make any guesses. It gets a little controversial.